Jake stood in the center of the landing bay, watching the massive doors of the palace open in front of him. The metal was not like anything humans had ever created. It was smooth and silver, moving without any sound or delay. It simply opened, as if responding to thoughts rather than commands. He was the captain of the human exploration ship called Discovery. He had trained for this moment his entire life. Now, finally, here he was on an alien world, about to meet with a civilization that had been traveling between stars for 1,000 years. The palace itself was impossible. Towers of crystal reached into the sky so high that clouds wrapped around them. The walls were made of some kind of stone that caught light and threw it back in waves of color. Blue mixed with violet, then green and gold, creating patterns that hurt Jake's eyes if he looked too long. Lisa Hayes walked beside him, her uniform perfect and her face calm. She was the protocol officer, which meant she had studied everything about thee and their customs. She had taught Jake how to bow, when to speak, what words to use, and how to stand so that he did not seem aggressive or weak. "Remember," Lisa said quietly as they walked through the halls, "the value precision and formality. Every word matters. Every gesture has meaning. Do not improvise. Do not try to be clever. Be exactly what they expect a human commander to be, brave, respectful, and direct." Jake nodded. He had heard these instructions 100 times during the long journey through space, but hearing them now, walking through alien corridors under alien stars, made them feel real in a way they never had before. The throne room was larger than any building Jake had ever seen. Its ceiling was so high that it seemed to be the sky itself. The walls were transparent, showing the landscape beyond. 3 suns hung in the sky, casting light from 3 different angles. The shadows they created were strange and beautiful. Emperor Vex sat on a throne carved from what might have been diamond or might have been something even harder. He was tall and thin, with skin that shimmered between blue and purple like oil on water. His eyes were large and dark, and they watched Jake with the focus of someone examining a strange new creature brought to their laboratory. Members of the High Council stood in a circle around the throne room. They wore robes that flowed like liquid, marked with patterns that showed their rank and family line. They did not smile. They did not show any emotion at all. Jake approached the throne as Lisa had taught him. Each step was measured. His back was straight. His hands were at his sides. When he reached the proper distance, he bowed, the gesture slow and respectful. "Your Majesty," Jake said, and his voice sounded small in the vast space. "I bring greetings from the human people of Earth. We are honored to meet the Empire. We come with open hearts and peaceful intentions." The Emperor did not move. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the slight hiss of the air circulation system. Then the Emperor spoke. His voice was deep and filled the entire chamber. "Commander, we have studied your species. You come from a world of danger and struggle. Your gravity is heavy. Your weather is violent. Your animals are aggressive. And yet you have not just survived. You have thrived. You have built civilization. You have reached for the stars." He paused. "Why?" Jake had been trained to answer this question. "Because we refused to accept limits. Because we believed that what seemed impossible might simply be difficult. Because humans have always preferred to reach for something greater than ourselves." The Emperor inclined his head slightly. "An acceptable answer. We believe your species will be valuable to the Empire. You will be granted trading privileges. You will be invited to trade negotiations. We will see if humanity can be trusted as partners in the galactic community." This was the moment that mattered. This was why Jake had traveled billions of miles through empty space. This was why he had spent years in training. The human race had been accepted into the larger community of the galaxy. But then something unexpected happened. A figure moved forward from the circle of council members. At first, Jake thought it was another official. Then he realized it was younger, more graceful. It was a female. She stepped into the light, and Jake found it hard to breathe. She was beautiful in a way that made it hard to look at her. Her skin shimmered with the same iridescent quality as the Emperor's, but it seemed warmer, more alive. Her eyes were dark and enormous, and they were looking directly at Jake. She wore robes that were than anything Jake had ever seen, marked with patterns of gold and silver. "Father," she said, and her voice was like music played on instruments humans did not have names for. "May I speak with the human commander?" The room became very quiet. The council members exchanged looks that Jake could not read. The Emperor's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air. The formal atmosphere cracked slightly. The Emperor looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Very well, Arya, but keep your conversation brief." Arya walked toward Jake. Her movements were smooth and precise, like water finding its way downhill. She stopped a few steps away from him, close enough that he could see details of her face. She was older than he had first thought, but still young. There was intelligence in her eyes and something else. Something like hunger or thirst or some need that had not been satisfied. "I am Princess Arya," she said. "I have studied human history. I have read your literature and your science. I have listened to your music. Your species fascinates me." Jake did not know what to say. No training had prepared him for this. The princess of the empire was speaking to him as though he mattered, as though his species mattered in a personal way to her. "I am honored, Your Highness," he managed. "Come," Arya said. "I want to show you something." She turned and walked toward a doorway that led away from the throne room. Jake looked back at Lisa, who was watching with eyes wide with surprise and concern. But the protocol officer gave him a small nod. He was supposed to maintain the alliance. He was supposed to be diplomatic. Jake followed the princess. They walked through corridors of crystal and light. The walls seemed almost alive, glowing softly with colors that had no names in human languages. Arya did not speak as they walked. She simply moved forward with purpose. Finally, they reached a vast garden unlike anything Jake had ever imagined. Trees grew there that were not quite like trees, with leaves that seemed to be made of glass or crystal. Flowers bloomed in colors that did not exist on Earth. The air smelled sweet and clean, but also strange, carrying scents that stirred something deep in Jake's memory of places he had never been. Arya stopped in the center of the garden and turned to face Jake directly. "I have spent my life preparing to understand galactic civilization. I have studied 100 species. I have learned their languages and customs and histories. But there is one thing I have never truly understood." "What is that?" Jake asked. "Struggle," Arya said simply. "My people have had everything for so long that we forget what it means to fight for survival. My world has been peaceful for 10,000 years. We have technology that solves every problem. We have knowledge that spans, and yet we have lost something. We have lost the drive to do the impossible." She looked directly at Jake, and her dark eyes held something that made his heart beat faster. "Your species," Arya continued, "comes from a world that tried to kill you every day. Your gravity should have crushed your bodies. Your sun should have burned your skin. Your animals should have eaten you. And yet you lived. You fought. You reached for the stars anyway. That is remarkable. That is something I must understand. That is something I need." Jake took a step closer. "Why are you telling me this?" Arya smiled, and it was the first genuine emotion he had seen from any. "Because I have made a decision," she said. "I need a husband, and I choose you." Jake felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. The three suns spun overhead. Nothing he had trained for, nothing he had learned, had prepared him for this moment. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I do not think I understand what you are asking." "Then let me be clear," Arya said, stepping closer. "I am asking you to marry me. I am asking you to join the royal family. I am asking you to help me understand what it means to be human." Jake sat in the guest quarters of the palace, and he could not stop thinking about her words. "I need a husband, and I choose you." The words repeated in his mind like a song that would not stop. The room was enormous. The ceiling was high enough to make Jake feel small. The furniture was made of materials he could not identify. Some pieces seemed to be carved from crystal. Others looked like they had grown rather than been built. Everything was beautiful and completely wrong for a human body. Lisa Hayes burst through the door without knocking. Her face was red. Her hands were shaking. She had left the formal diplomatic dinner early, and Jake knew why. The news had spread through the palace like fire. The princess of the empire wanted to marry a human commander. The impossible had become real. "Do you understand what you have done?" Lisa demanded. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "I did not do anything," Jake said, standing up. "She made the declaration. I simply listened." "Exactly," Lisa snapped. "She declared she wants to marry you, and now humanity is trapped in a situation we cannot control. The Emperor has not spoken since the dinner ended. The High Council is in closed meetings. The other galactic powers are sending messages asking what Earth's position is on this marriage. We do not even have a position because this was impossible." Jake walked to the window. Outside, the night sky was full of stars. Some of them were probably colonies. Some might be human outposts far in the future if this marriage happened, if humanity survived long enough to expand that far. "What does the Emperor want?" Jake asked. "Nobody knows," Lisa said. "That is the problem. This could be a trap. The princess could be using you to humiliate Earth. The Emperor could use this marriage as an excuse to bring humanity under control. There are 1,000 ways this ends badly, and I can only think of a few ways it ends well." There was a soft sound at the door. Both Jake and Lisa turned quickly. A figure stood in the entrance. It was a who had lived among humans for several years. He was tall and thin, with skin that held more blue than purple. He had studied human culture and spoke English with only a slight accent. "Commander," said, his voice calm, "you are needed at the palace court. The Emperor wishes to speak with you." Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. "This is it. They are going to make their move." But shook his head. "The Emperor simply wishes to have a conversation. It is nothing to fear." Jake was not sure if that was true or a polite lie, but he had not traveled billions of miles to run away when things became difficult. He followed, leaving Lisa in the guest quarters to worry. The palace halls were different at night. They seemed to glow with soft light that came from the walls themselves. Guards stood at intervals, their faces blank and unreadable. They did not try to stop Jake, and they simply watched as they passed. The Emperor's personal chambers were not the grand throne room. They were simpler but somehow more impressive. The walls were transparent, showing the landscape below. The 3 suns had set, leaving the sky full of stars and the light of 3 moons. Emperor Vex stood alone, looking out at his world. He did not turn when Jake entered. "My daughter is extraordinary," the Emperor said. His voice was different here, less formal, more tired. "She has been exceptional since she was born. She was meant to be a bridge between our people and the galaxy, but she has always been searching for something she could not find in all her years of study and preparation." Jake said nothing. The Emperor clearly had more to say. "I thought she searched for love," the Emperor continued. "Then I thought she searched for purpose. Then I believed she searched for a way to escape the duties that being royal demands." The Emperor turned to face Jake. "But I was wrong. She searched for proof that struggle creates character, proof that limitation creates strength, proof that a species that is not born into power can still achieve greatness." The Emperor moved closer. His eyes were intense and dark, studying Jake with frightening focus. "She sees all of that in you, in your species. Your people survived against every possible obstacle. You reached for the stars not because you were destined to do it, but because you refused to accept that you could not." "With respect," Jake said carefully, "I am only one human. I do not represent the strength of my entire species." "No," the Emperor agreed, "but you represent the possibility, and that is what matters." He paused. If I allow this marriage, I declare to the entire galactic empire that humanity is not beneath us, that you are not a curiosity or a trading opportunity, that you are family. Do you understand the weight of what that means?" Jake nodded slowly. "There are those in the empire who will see this as weakness," the emperor said. "There are those who believe that should only marry. There are those who will question whether a human can understand the burden of being royal." The emperor's expression hardened. "Some will even believe that my daughter has been manipulated by a clever species looking to invade our family line with genetic material that might carry unknown dangers." "That is not my intention," Jake said. "I know it is not," the emperor replied. "I am not the one you must convince. You must convince the empire. You must prove that humanity deserves this place beside the throne." The emperor walked back to the window. "There is a test you will face. In the outer colonies, the species is rebelling. They have served the empire for 10,000 years, but now they demand independence. The traditional response is to send warships, to crush the rebellion, to show that defiance has a cost." Jake felt his stomach tighten. This was not a hypothetical question. This was a real crisis. "But Arya believes there is another way," the emperor continued. "She believes that humans, who have overcome so much through adaptation and cleverness, might see a solution we have missed. If this rebellion happens before your marriage is final, you will be asked to advise on how to handle it. Your answer will determine if you are truly welcome in this family. It will also determine if humanity can be trusted to think like, not like the struggling species you once were." Jake understood the trap. If he recommended military force, he would be saying that humans were just like. If he recommended peace, he might be seen as weak or as someone trying to undermine strength. "The test seems impossible," Jake said. "It is," the emperor agreed. "All great things demand that we accept impossible challenges. Your species reached the stars by accepting the impossible. Now you must do it again, but this time on behalf of an entire empire." Jake left the emperor's chambers with his mind spinning. He had come to make peace and establish trade. Now he was being asked to join a family that ruled 5,000 stars. He was being asked to help solve problems that had troubled an ancient civilization for generations. He was being asked to marry a woman he had met only hours before. And the worst part was that he knew he would do it, because refusing meant humanity would be rejected. Refusing meant the greatest opportunity his species had ever had would slip away. Refusing meant admitting that humans could not handle the challenge of being something more than survivors. He found Arya waiting in the garden where she had first spoken to him. She stood among the impossible flowers, her white robes glowing faintly in the starlight. "The emperor spoke to you," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes," Jake replied. "He told me about the test. He told me about the rebellion." "And?" Arya asked. "And I will help," Jake said. "Not because I understand your empire or your traditions, but because I believe that humans have something to teach. That struggle teaches you lessons that power and time cannot provide. That sometimes the simplest solution is the hardest one to see when you are surrounded by strength." Arya smiled, and for a moment, Jake saw not a princess, but a person who had waited a long time for someone to understand her. "Then we will face this together," she said, "and the empire will see what humans are truly made of." Rebellion started 5 days after Jake agreed to marry the princess. A mining colony in the outer territories stopped responding to commands. Then a military outpost reported that ships were refusing to accept supply shipments. Then the High Council received a formal message. They demanded independence, or they would seize it by force. The empire's response was immediate and predictable. The military chiefs demanded warships. They wanted to show strength. They wanted to crush the rebellion before it could spread to other colonies. The High Council agreed almost unanimously. This was how power worked. You showed dominance or you lost control. But the emperor called a special meeting in a chamber away from the main palace. Only a few people were invited: the emperor, Arya, 3 military commanders, Lisa Hayes, and Jake. Jake stood in that chamber, knowing that the next words out of his mouth would determine if he truly belonged with Arya, or if he was simply an outsider who would always be looking in from beyond glass walls. They have been part of the Empire for 10,000 years, the first military commander said. He was tall and broad, with skin that was more blue than most. His name was, and he commanded the Outer Fleet. We have invested in their colonies. We have protected them from pirate attacks. We have given them technology and knowledge. And this is how they repay us, with betrayal. They do not see it as betrayal, Arya said quietly. They see it as liberation. They believe they have sacrificed enough. They want to control their own future. Then they should have asked permission, replied coldly. They should have followed protocol. Instead, they have chosen defiance. And defiance must be punished, or the entire empire falls apart. Every colony will believe they can rebel. Every subject species will think they can negotiate with the throne as equals. The Emperor looked at Jake. Commander, you have not spoken. What is your assessment? Jake felt 300 eyes on him. He felt the weight of humanity resting on his shoulders. This was the moment. This was the test. With respect, Jake said carefully, I think we are looking at this wrong. His eyes flashed with anger. What could you possibly understand about empire management? Your species has existed in space for less than 1 year. Jake ignored the insult. Let me ask a question. Why do they want independence? Because they are ungrateful, snapped. That is not an answer, Jake replied. That is an emotion, not a reason. There is a difference. If we want to solve this problem, we need to understand what they actually want. The second commander, a female named, leaned forward. What would you recommend? Jake took a breath. This was dangerous. If he recommended something that seemed weak, the military would destroy him. But if he recommended violence, he would be no different from us. He would prove that humans had nothing unique to offer. I would send a negotiator, Jake said. Someone who can speak with the leadership and understand their grievances. Someone who can find out if they want complete independence or if they want more say in decisions that affect their colonies. Someone who can discover if there is a middle ground. And while we waste time negotiating, said angrily, they continue to build up their military forces. They send messages to other colonies. They try to turn the entire empire against rule. Or, Jake said, standing his ground, while we take time to understand their position, we show the rest of the empire that we are not tyrants. We show that we'll listen to their subject species. We prove that the empire is built on something more than force. The Emperor did not speak. He simply watched, waiting to see how Jake would defend his position. You are asking us to appear weak, said. It was not hostile, it was a genuine observation. No, Jake replied. I am asking you to appear wise. My species learned this lesson on Earth. We fought countless wars, and the wars that ended in lasting peace were not the ones we won through force. They were the ones where both sides agreed that understanding each other was more important than victory. That is a naive philosophy, said. It works for small species on single worlds, but an empire spanning 5,000 stars cannot operate on philosophy. It must operate on power. An empire spanning 5,000 stars, Jake said carefully, operates on the loyalty of the species within it. If you rule through force alone, you will always have rebellion. If you rule through respect, rebellion becomes far less likely. There was a long silence. The Emperor's expression did not change, but Jake saw something shift in Arya's face. She believed him, or at least she wanted to believe him. I will send a negotiator, the Emperor said. Commander will accompany them. Stood up abruptly. You are putting a human in charge of an important diplomatic mission. He has been in our empire for less than a week. He will not be in charge, the Emperor replied, but he will advise, and we will see if his understanding of struggle can find a solution that military force cannot provide." The meeting ended, and Jake felt drained. He had advocated for peace, and now his reputation depended on whether that peace could actually happen. If they refused to negotiate, if they saw negotiation as weakness and attacked, then Jake would be responsible for whatever followed. Thousands of lives might depend on his judgment. Arya found him in the palace gardens that night. She moved silently through the shadows, and for a moment Jake thought he was dreaming. She wore simpler clothes without the formal robes. Her skin seemed to glow faintly in the starlight. "You were brave in that chamber," she said. "Not all would have spoken against. He is powerful, and his supporters are many." "Was I right?" Jake asked. "Or was I naive like Sid?" Arya sat beside him on a bench of crystal. She took his hand, and her skin felt warm. "I do not know if you are right. That is why we have to try. But I know that you believed what you said, and that is the first step toward making the impossible possible." They sat in silence for a long time, hands linked, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there they were gathering. Somewhere out there, a solution waited to be found. And somewhere in the space between them, Jake and Arya were building something new. "I am afraid," Arya admitted. "The Empire will judge you by whether this works. If you fail, they will say that humans cannot be trusted with important decisions. They will say I was foolish to choose you." "And if I succeed?" Jake asked. "If you succeed," Arya said, squeezing his hand, "then you prove that humanity has a place among the stars. You prove that I chose correctly. You prove that a species that learned to survive through understanding rather than force can teach an ancient empire something it has forgotten." Jake knew she was right. Everything depended on the next few weeks. Everything depended on finding a way to turn rebellion into understanding. Everything depended on proving that humans were more than survivors. They were problem solvers. They were builders of peace in a galaxy that had known only the heavy hand of power. And as he looked at Arya, at the princess who had chosen him for reasons he still did not fully understand, Jake felt something harden in his chest. Determination. Purpose. The same drive that had carried his species from Earth to the stars now carried him toward an impossible goal. "I will not fail," he said quietly. "For your sake, for humanity, I will not fail." Jake arrived at the outpost in a small diplomatic ship. Ambassador, a politician with 300 years of experience, went with him. Lisa Hayes insisted on accompanying them as well, despite the danger. She said it was her job to protect human interests. Jake thought she was just too stubborn to sit safely at home while history happened. The planet was nothing like Solaria. It was rocky and harsh, with mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The gravity was stronger than Earth's, making Jake feel heavier than he should. The air was thin and cold, filled with scents that were alien and strange. They themselves were tall, with 4 arms and skin that seemed to be made of dark stone. Their eyes were huge and glowed faintly with amber light. They looked like creatures designed for survival on a world that wanted to kill them. Their leader was named. He was older than most of the others, his stone-like skin cracked with lines that might have been scars or might have been something else. He looked at Jake with an expression that was hard to read. "A human," said, his voice like rocks grinding together. "The Empire sends its pet to negotiate with us. I find this insulting." Jake did not become angry. He did not become defensive. He simply nodded. "You find it insulting because you believe a human cannot understand your position. You believe that only a could truly grasp what it means to be ruled by someone else's decisions." "That is correct," said flatly. "Then you are wrong," Jake replied. "My species has been ruled for thousands of years. We have been conquered and colonized and conquered again. We have been told that we were inferior, that we could never be more than what we were. And every time we were told that, we refused to believe it. We reached higher. We did more. We became more." Turned away, dismissing Jake. "Your history is irrelevant to our situation." My history is exactly relevant to your situation, Jake said, his voice steady. Because I understand what it means to want freedom. I understand what it feels like to have someone else tell you what your future will be. And I understand that sometimes that fight for freedom is just another version of the same trap, over and over again. Paused. He did not turn around, but he did pause. Jake continued. They have been part of the empire for 10,000 years. You say you want independence, but what does independence look like? If you seize it through force, if you fight a war against an empire that has 5,000 stars and weaponry you cannot match, what will you win? You will win destruction. Your world will burn. Your people will die. And in the end, they will still rule you, but they will rule you with an iron fist rather than an open hand. So you come here to tell me that resistance is pointless? Asked. No, Jake said. I come here to tell you that there are other ways. Ways that do not require your people to die for a freedom that comes with too high a price. Ambassador spoke for the first time. The Emperor is willing to grant the more autonomy. You may govern your own colonies. You may set your own policies regarding mining and development. The Empire will not interfere in your internal affairs. Turned around slowly. That is a lie. They have said similar things before. We are always given a measure of freedom, and then when it suits them, they take it away. Jake stepped forward. Then you need a different kind of agreement, one that is written and formal, one that has penalties if broken, one that is signed by the Emperor himself and witnessed by the entire High Council. A human written agreement, said with something like scorn, as if your species' words matter in a galaxy dominated by power. My species' words matter because we keep them, Jake replied. Because humans understand that trust is more valuable than victory. Because if you break trust, the other person will never believe you again. And without belief, without trust, nothing else matters. Something changed in his expression. It was subtle, but Jake saw it. The leader was considering the possibility. Come, said, walk with me. I will show you the territories. I will show you why we cannot continue as we are. Jake followed across the rocky landscape. They traveled for hours, past mining operations and settlements. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw infrastructure built by hands. He saw cities carved from stone and metal. He saw evidence of a civilization that was far more advanced than he had expected. But he also saw something else. He saw control. The mining equipment was technology. The power systems were design. The weapons were manufacture. They had been allowed to develop as long as they remained dependent on their rulers. Do you see? Asked. Everything we have is because they allowed it, but we built it ourselves. Our hands shaped this. Our minds designed that, and yet we own none of it. If we rebel, they will simply take it away. Then do not rebel, Jake said. Demand ownership. Demand partnership. Demand that the technology transferred to control. Make it part of the agreement. Make it binding. Was quiet for a long time. And you believe the Emperor will agree to such terms? I believe he will, Jake said. If you approach this as a negotiation rather than a war. The Emperor does not want to fight you. The military wants to fight you, because war is what the military understands. But the Emperor understands that a species living in the Empire and working toward mutual advancement is more valuable than a species that has been conquered and will always harbor resentment. You are very confident, said. I am not confident, Jake replied. I am desperate, because if this fails, thousands of your people will die, and my species will be seen as weak, and the Empire will return to doing things through force, so I have to make this work, and so do you. By the end of the week, they had the framework for an agreement. They would remain part of the Empire, but as an autonomous region with control over their own development. Technology would be transferred to hands over a period of 50 years. Representatives would sit on the High Council. A formal charter would be created, signed by the Emperor, and witnessed by the entire galactic community. When Jake returned to Solaria with the agreement, the Emperor read it carefully. The military commanders protested. They said it was too generous. They said it was weakness. They said they would eventually rebel again. But the emperor simply nodded. "This is wise," he said. "This is the kind of thinking that will keep an empire together, not just for decades or centuries, but for—" The military commander stood up. "You are making a mistake, Your Majesty. This human has poisoned you with his ideas of weakness." "No," the emperor replied, his voice hard and cold. "I am making a decision that shows the galaxy what true strength looks like. Strength is not the ability to crush your enemies. Strength is the ability to turn enemies into partners. Strength is the vision to see that today's surrender is tomorrow's victory." The agreement was signed 1 month later, and a delegation attended the ceremony. And as they signed the charter, Jake saw something shift in the galactic community. Species that had thought about rebellion began to hope that independence might be possible without war. The Empire had proven something remarkable, that power could be used not to dominate, but to build. That night, Arya found Jake alone on the palace balcony. She looked at him with eyes that held new respect, new understanding. "You did it," she said simply. "You took something that should have ended in war, and you turned it into something beautiful." "We did it," Jake corrected. "You were the one who believed this was possible. I just helped find the path." Arya took his hand and pressed it against her heart. Through her crystalline skin, Jake could feel something beating inside her. A heart, different from his own, but the same in the way that mattered. "I love you," she said. "I knew it the moment I saw you in the throne room, and now I know that I chose correctly, not just for me but for everyone." Jake pulled her close, and together they looked out at the stars. The impossible had become possible. Humanity had not just joined the galactic community. They had already changed it. The wedding day arrived on the calendar, and Jake could not believe how fast the weeks had passed. The ceremony would be held in the Grand Cathedral, a place so ancient that historians were not sure when it had been built. Some said it was 10,000 years old. Others said it was far older. The cathedral was vast beyond human understanding. Its ceiling was so high that it disappeared into what might have been sky or might have been the cathedral itself. Pillars of crystal rose from the floor, and each one was carved with the histories of achievements. Wars won, colonies established, technologies created, civilizations joined to the empire. Representatives from 5,000 worlds had been invited. They came in ships that filled the sky. They came as observers of what was being called the most important wedding of the millennium. The marriage of a princess to a human commander was no longer a scandal. It was being recognized as the moment when humanity truly became part of the galactic community. Jake stood in a preparation chamber, wearing robes that had been created specifically for him. They were white and silver, designed to honor both human and traditions. The fabric was made from something that was not quite silk and not quite metal. It caught the light and reflected it in ways that seemed to celebrate rather than hide his human form. Lisa Hayes came in to check that everything was correct. She wore a diplomatic dress now, a full member of the delegation. She looked at Jake with eyes that were proud and slightly worried at the same time. "You look like a prince," she said. "I feel like an imposter," Jake replied. "I am still the same person who landed on this planet 6 weeks ago, except now I am about to marry someone who could rule half the galaxy." "You are different," Lisa said firmly. "You came here as a representative of humanity. You are leaving as someone who changed history. That is not an imposter. That is a leader." Arya was in a different chamber, preparing with her attendants. The traditional wedding dress was more robe than dress, made from fabric that was woven from materials that did not exist on Earth. It was white like snow, marked with patterns in gold and silver that told the story of her lineage. The patterns went back thousands of years, each generation adding their contribution to the design. The Empress, Arya's mother, helped her into the dress. She had said very little since the engagement was announced, and her expression was still difficult to read. But now, as she fastened the final pieces of the robe, she leaned close to her daughter. "I doubted this," the Empress said quietly. "I thought you were young and foolish, but I see now what you saw. This human has something that we have lost, something that reminds us what it felt like to want something so badly that we were willing to risk everything." "Are you happy?" Arya asked. "I am terrified," the Empress replied, "but I am also hopeful, and that is a feeling I have not had in a very long time." The ceremony began with ancient words spoken in languages that had not been used in 5,000 years. The High Priest of Celeria, a figure so old that his skin seemed almost transparent, intoned blessings and spoke of the joining of worlds. Thousands of beings watched, and they could all see this moment on screens that translated the ceremony into formats each species could understand. The bride and groom approached the altar from opposite sides. Arya moved like water, her white robe trailing behind her like clouds. Jake walked with the precision that military training had given him, each step measured and purposeful. When they met at the center, the High Priest raised his hands. Two worlds come together, two species join as one family. What was separate becomes bound, what was different becomes united. The vows came next. Jake spoke first, his voice clear in the vast cathedral. "I stand before you as a representative of humanity. I stand before you as a captain of the stars. I stand before you as someone who has never had to struggle for survival, but who learned from those who did." Jake paused, gathering his thoughts. "I pledge to Arya that I will bring to this marriage the same hunger for understanding that brought my species to the stars. I pledge that I will work every day to bridge the gulf between our worlds. I pledge that I will never take for granted the incredible gift of being chosen by someone so extraordinary." The crowd was silent, no one moved. Then Arya spoke. Her voice was music and strength combined. "I stand before you as Princess of the Empire. I stand before you as someone who was born into power and privilege. I stand before you as someone who searched for something her entire life and finally found it." She looked directly at Jake. "I pledge that I will learn what it means to want something with the hunger of a species that has known scarcity. I pledge that I will carry the lessons of humanity into my service of the Empire. I pledge that I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the choice you have made to stand beside me." The High Priest bound their hands together with a ribbon of light that seemed to be made from the stars themselves. "They are joined. They are one. The marriage is sealed." The applause that followed was like thunder. Species that had never met before cheered together. The delegation stood and roared their approval. The humans who had traveled from Earth wept with joy. Even the military commanders, the ones who had opposed this union, rose to their feet and acknowledged the new alliance. The celebration that followed lasted for 3 days. Food from 5,000 worlds was served. Music was played on instruments that had been designed by countless civilizations. And in the center of it all, Jake and Arya received the congratulations of an empire. On the final night of celebration, Jake stood on a high balcony with Arya, looking down at the palace and the city beyond. The 3 suns had set, leaving the sky full of stars. Some of those stars some were human colonies now, growing slowly but growing. Some belonged to species that had never been to Earth and never would be. "Do you regret it?" Arya asked. Jake took her hand. "No, but I wonder sometimes if I truly understand what I have done. I came here as a representative of my species. I am leaving as someone bound to an alien world and an alien family. My people on Earth might never forgive me for that." "They will," Arya said with certainty. "Because one day, far in the future, humans will look back at this moment and realize that everything they achieved was built on what you did. The alliances you formed, the respect you earned, the understanding you created." "And what about you?" Jake asked. "Do you regret choosing a human when you could have married someone from your own species?" Arya smiled. "Never. You taught me that sometimes the most valuable thing in life is not what comes easily. It is what requires struggle. It is what demands growth. It is what forces us to be better than we were." They stood together in silence, watching the stars. In the empire below, species that had never worked together before were learning to cooperate. The agreement with the was already inspiring other subject species to hope that independence might be possible without war. Humanity was no longer seen as the weakest addition to the galactic community. They were seen as partners, equals. Jake thought of Earth, billions of miles away. He thought of the billions of humans who looked up at night and wondered what was out there. Those humans would never know his name. They would never understand the exact role he played in shaping humanity's future. But they would live in a world where their species was respected and valued by civilizations that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. "I love you," he said to Arya, and the words seemed to carry more weight than any words he had ever spoken. "I love you," Arya replied, "and I love what you are making of our empire. I love what you are teaching our people about strength and sacrifice. I love that you showed us that power is not the opposite of peace. It is the foundation on which peace can be built." As the night deepened, they remained on the balcony, hands linked, looking out at a future that they would build together. The impossible had become real. The struggle had created something beautiful. And somewhere, billions of miles away, humanity looked up at the night sky and saw not just stars, but possibility. Jake had reached for something that should have been beyond the grasp of humans, and in doing so, he had changed not just his own life, but the lives of an entire species. He had proven that humanity was more than survivors of a harsh world. They were builders of bridges. They were creators of peace. They were, in their own way, capable of greatness that no amount of technology or time could measure. And that, he thought as he held his wife's hand and looked out at the empire that was now partially his, was the greatest achievement of all.